it really feels like it was in midlife that the big things started to happen. I just didn't know that I didn't have a voice. I was a chronic people pleaser. I call myself a recovering perfectionist, recovering people pleaser. I didn't know that I had opinions. I was someone very much thought I was a go with the flow person, but it just turns out that I was trying to go with the flow.
Welcome to Midlife Unfiltered, a podcast about unapologetically embracing the season of me as we live the lives we want in midlife and beyond. I'm Anita McLachlan.
I'm Webb. We're here to make some noise, say hell no to outdated stereotypes, and hell yes to living life on our terms. Hey Anita, I am so looking forward to this conversation that we're about to have today, but how are you first?
I am really well. I'm a bit rugged up because here in Vegas it's a little bit chilly, but then again it is the end of, when we record this it is winter time, so I guess that's, it's what's going to happen. But I'm cozy now and I'm super excited and really looking forward to having a chat with our beautiful guest.
Yes, and knowing that Katy, our guest, is also in Melbourne where I am, I don't think Brisbane could possibly be that cold, but that's nice to hear in it.
Got my scarf on right, Erica. Ready to roll.
I love it. We had snow forecast for my town the other day and I was like, really? That never happens. It didn't happen, but it was on the radar. So anyway, today we are diving into a conversation around the disruption of midlife, which is our theme for this season 2 of Midlife Unfiltered. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with our beautiful guest, Katy Abbott, who is someone I have known for a number of years and just truly appreciate as a human. She's just a wonderful human and very generously willing to share some of her midlife story with us. I'll tell you a little bit about Katy and then we're going to dive in and I'll get Katy to tell you a little bit more. But Katy is an amazing composer. She is a storyteller at heart and she also works as an artist mentor. One of the things that I know about Katy personally, but I know is something that infuses her work as well, is a really deep curiosity around human nature, right? What makes us do the things that we do? What makes us tick? And so it's probably not surprising that in Katy's midlife, she's sort of told us that there's been a lot of self-exploration, a lot of self-discovery. And one of the really cool things that I know Katy's going to talk to us about today is that we are talking about the disruption, and she's going to share with us some really positive outcomes of disruption in her midlife journey around that deepening of self-understanding and building a life that really actually suits who she is and who she's discovered herself to be. So welcome, Katy.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It is really our deepest pleasure to have you with us. So I've given a little bit of an introduction, Katy, but is there anything else you want to sort of tell us to paint a picture of, who you are? And I know we like to sometimes maybe even just like ask if you're comfortable sharing your age with us so we know where in your midlife journey you are.
Of course. I'm 53. And I'm a mum of 3 boys. I have twins who have just turned 21 and my youngest is doing his final year of school. When I was younger, I was one of those kids who was vague and looked out the window and was sort of a little bit afraid of anyone saying boo to me. And I spent a lot of my younger years being bewildered and also not knowing really what I wanted to do with my life. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I discovered that it was music. And I kind of started not quite from the beginning, but very, beginner-like in composition. And it was sort of then that the composition bug bit. And I had a drive, and things really changed for me from that point. Yeah, so I work as a composer. I'm mostly a commissioned composer. So that means that people say, oh, we would like a piece from you, and then I write a piece for them and they perform it and hopefully record it. And things sort of have just built bit by bit from those very beginning points. And I've also taught for many years at the Conservatorium the Conservatorium of Music at Melbourne Uni, where I'm not now teaching on staff, which we'll probably get to in the conversation, but have been a part-time academic, even though I've never seen myself as academic, and probably the least likely person to have a career and be an academic and do the things that I'm doing. So it's kind of fun to look back and wonder how on earth that all happened.
And I know that this isn't necessarily a conversation about you as the composer. It's going to be you as the woman and all of those things that it incorporates. But I think it's worth pointing out that you've had some amazing career success in the last recent times. Like, you're the featured composer at the MSO at the moment, aren't you? Is that right? Have I got that correct?
Yeah, I'm the composer in residence for the Melbourne
Yeah.
Symphony this year, which is just such an honour, and it involves them playing quite a lot of my music, and they've commissioned a really large orchestral work, which is actually going to be performed just in a couple of weeks, alongside some of my other work. So I've been very fortunate that people have wanted to hear more of my sound, and it does tie up into who I am, because, as you said, I'm very curious about humans, and I like to give voice to people who don't have a voice. That's kind of become a thing inadvertently that I do, and it probably goes back because I didn't feel that I had a voice, and as I found my own voice, I can give a platform for other voices too.
So we want to dive into talking about sort of your midlife disruption. Was that a process of finding your own voice? Like, I kind of hear you say that, and I think, well, did you find your voice most significantly in midlife, or has it been this kind of ongoing journey from your late 20s, figuring out, okay, here's what I want to do, here's the thing that lights me up, and dive in anywhere you want. But I would love to just get into that story of what disruption did you experience, and how did that incorporate finding your voice and figuring out, this is who I am?
Some of the disruption was circumstantial. So I went through a divorce 8 or 9 years ago. I had twins 21 years ago. That was fairly disruptive. In my marriage, we lived overseas a fair bit, and I look back and think, I didn't really want to do it, but I went along with it. I agreed, but in my heart, I didn't really want to go. And so there was a lot of disruption and internal tension, I suppose. But also the disruption has been I don't want to say inflicted, because that makes it sound negative, but I can't think of a better word right now, but not reported either. I've instigated the disruption for myself, knowing that I wanted that because I wanted things to be different. And in order for things to be different, I needed to, I call it pattern interrupt where I was. But in order to know that I needed that pattern interruption, I needed to know that there was a problem. And I suppose if I look back, looking backwards is very informative. I can see that it probably was a very slow and steady pathway, but it really feels like it was in midlife that the big things started to happen. I just didn't know that I didn't have a voice. And so it was that awareness that once I realized I didn't have a voice, I was a chronic people pleaser. I call myself a recovering perfectionist, recovering people pleaser. I didn't know that I had opinions. I was someone very much I thought I was a go with the flow person, but it just turns out that I was trying to go with the flow in order to not feel all the things that we sometimes feel like not feeling on the outer, or needing to feel that people liked me, and all of those things. Also, starting music so late, when all my peers had started when they were 4 and 5 years old, I felt very different and very hesitant, and that I had missed out. But it turns out, in fact, that I realised that it was actually a strength. It was something that I could work with, because often my life had been like that, and I'd made the best of a situation, something that had been sort of perceived as maybe not ideal, I could turn into something that was even better than if it hadn't happened in the first place. So once the awareness kicked in of, oh, this is why I'm behaving in this way, or this is why I'm reacting in this way, or this is why it's hard for me to make a decision, or, oh, I do have an opinion about that, but I don't want to say it. Once the awareness of those things kicked in, then I could be a little bit more deliberate about changing those things.
You can see both Anita and I just like nodding like little bobbleheads here, because we clearly share some perfectionist and people pleasing tendencies. I'm not sure. I wonder if you remember what the catalyst for that, oh, I don't have a voice, like how did you figure that out?
I had a number of scenarios where it suddenly occurred to me that the situation that I thought I was in was actually different to the situation in reality. And one of those was within my marriage, where I was going along with the flow. But I realised when Rosie Batty was Australian of the Year that there were a lot of articles in the paper about domestic violence and why do women stay and these kind of things. And I was thinking, I just kept getting drawn to them, and I was wondering why. And I was thinking, at one point I thought, I'm kind of resonating with this, but I'm not in that situation. But it did occur to me that I was in a situation where I was changing myself in order to appease. And once I had that awareness, I couldn't unsee that. And then I'm a mad researcher. And when I get a bee in my bonnet about something, I can't quite let it go. And so I was deeply, deeply researching this. I remember there's been a few times in my life where I've just sat at Google and gone, I know that I'm searching for something and I don't know what it is, but I know it's in here somewhere. And I would just find my way down rabbit holes until I found that. And those things have been quite significant. One I know, Erica, that you talk about is being a highly sensitive person. And once I came across that, well, that was actually like a really big door opening for me. But this particular one, I was resonating with not being myself in a situation where I hadn't realized that before. So I could, for the first time, see a distance between who I thought I was and who I really was. And that was fascinating to me. And as I started to cover some of that distance, I realized that I was in a situation that probably wasn't super healthy, that there was a lot of communication difficulties and a very difficult relationship, I would say. And so even though it looked perfect on the outside, on the inside, it wasn't great at all. And in fact, it was very eroding. So that was definitely one part. At the same time, I mentioned that I started music in my late 20s, and I really was very fortunate that it really just was a series of incremental successes. So I'd write a piece, I'd get really great feedback. People would say, oh, we want to play that. Maybe we can play that, and maybe you could write us a piece. And it just kept going. And for the first time in my life, I had this positive reinforcement of something that was coming from the very core of me. I mean, because music just, comes from you. And it felt really weird to me. And I started to see a disconnect between how I was perceived in my professional world and to how it felt to be in my personal world. And so again, there was this distance between the two lives, and I just kept getting a lot of positive reinforcement, not just because of my music, but who I was in the industry, as well as like how I showed up, I suppose, not who I was. And I show up as myself, and yes, I was a bit hesitant, and I've learned not to be that. But that distance also showed me, hang on, things aren't as you think they are, and you do have a voice. Because I realize now that, particularly in my early works, for the first 10 or 15 years, my music was my voice, and it was acceptable and palatable because I could say whatever I wanted musically with no words. And that was an expression that I hadn't had available to me before. And I didn't realize that I had things to say, or that I had things about me to say as well. So we mentioned that for the MSO that they've commissioned a big work from me. And this is a piece called Hidden Thoughts 3. And it's, the subtitle is Stories of Awe. But around the time of my separation in 2015, I had come up with this idea called Hidden Thoughts, because I used to wonder, there are all these people in the world that I pass on the street every day, and I see people, getting cross when people cut each other off and all of that. And I used to go, why are they doing that? Don't they know that that person might have just experienced something bad, or they might be in shock, and they've wandered across the road without realizing? Why get angry at them? Give them the benefit of the doubt. And it fascinated me that there's this hidden world inside of us that we weren't saying or presenting to the outside world. And I ended up doing an anonymous survey and for women, and I sent it out throughout the world, and I got hundreds of responses, which was amazing. And the questions that I asked them were, do you have hidden thoughts and feelings? Tell me what they are. What would you like to be brave about? What would you like to be braver about? And tell me more about hidden thoughts or courage. And I got an outpouring. And I then took all of those anonymous responses and I set them into a 1-hour piece. So it's called Hidden Thoughts 1, Do I Matter? Because one of the lines were, do I matter? Am I loved? And there are all these just really, some of the words were just gorgeous, hilarious, funny, gut-wrenching, confessional, body image, sex, grief, feeling trapped, in that midlife in particular. And I was really curious about my age group at that time. And I realize now in retrospect, it was also because I knew that I had a voice, but I didn't feel I could see the distance between. I then knew that I had a voice, but I couldn't also speak words. So I spoke other people's words, and I asked them what they'd learned to be braver about and what they would like to be braver about. And this actually won Australia's biggest compositional prize a couple of years later, which is wonderful. And it's then allowed another couple of pieces, including this one, to sort of be conceived. But that really was, you're asking me, Erica, what was the thing? And I think that was a very particular thing. Even though I didn't know it at the time, I've always been drawn to following my pulls, particularly once I started music, not knowing where they were going, like this thing about I will need to research something, but I don't know what it is. And they always take me somewhere really significant. And so that was, I suppose, the beginning of me being able to use my voice in words as well as in music, but also to align myself with not just writing another piece of music for the sake of writing another piece of music, but to say something meaningful to people, because I've ended up in classical music, not as a classical musician. And so I want to also break down those barriers to people who don't normally listen to classical music, but to find something that might be for them or a little bit different, and a doorway into, I suppose, what music can allow you to experience. Because some of the things in that women's Do I Matter work that's an hour long are very crunchy and spiky and difficult. But because music happens in real time and the audience is sitting there, they sit with the words that might be repeated or sung slowly, and they have to experience those words. And I think music can make unpalatable things more palatable. And so then that led me to the second one, which I can talk about if that's interesting later. But that, I think that's a very long answer to your quite short question.
Such a good answer, though. Oh my gosh, I
There's
have to get
so much
myself
in
down to I got to get myself down to see this piece. I want to throw over to you, Anita, because I know you'll have a question. So I just want to throw to you. I have like a million, but I'm gonna throw to you.
That's very kind. Yeah. I have so many questions, Katy. Thank you for sharing that. That was, at some point, I found myself tearing up because this resonates with us, and why we're doing this podcast is for women to feel empowered and to find their voice. And I think the medium of music is something that will absolutely help them explore that, give them permission to explore that. I'm curious, as you got that incredible feedback from women in your survey, how did that make you feel inside? Could you relate to some of the words that they were using? And how did that then feel for you, when you could hear their stories and their words in that survey response?
It was, incredible in the literal meaning of the word. I remember the first couple of surveys coming through, and I thought that I was onto a good idea. But when those first couple came through, I thought, oh, wow, this is exactly what I was hoping for. And I firstly felt relief because I thought, I've really got something to say here. And at the same time, I would say 30% of people who were writing in the comments at the end, do you want to say anything else? They thanked me for the opportunity to be able to say something out aloud that they've never said aloud before. And in the performance of this work as well, we offer that night's audience the opportunity to submit a thought that they've never had before, and it's then incorporated into that night's performance. And a few people have written to me afterwards and said, oh my goodness, that was quite something, because I'm really interested in the interaction between the composer and the performers and the audience. And when I was writing the piece, which took about a year or 18 months for a whole lot of reasons, sometimes I was just crying, because I'm trying to set the words to music. And that's probably what I do best in composition. I know how to set words to music so that they can be understood and felt, or to capture the essence, I suppose, of what the words are. And, when people are talking about grief and not being a parent, or they're not a parent but they want to be a parent, or they're a parent and they really don't want to be a parent, or there's moments where they don't want to be a parent, or it was gut-wrenching. So in order to write the best work that I could and to honour the words, I also felt a responsibility to feel them. So yes, certain things did jump out at me and I resonated for sure, and they absolutely made it into the piece. But there were also ones that I didn't resonate with at all, that was just very different experience to me, but illuminating nonetheless. And it was interesting for me to learn how to handle and mould the words in a way that was true for each of the people who wrote them, but at the same time create something cohesive. So, how do you handle when someone's saying something very difficult about grief or sex or body image, and that's not normally heard in a concert setting? how much do you dwell on that, and how uncomfortable do you make the audience? How much do you allow, how much can they handle as well? And so, yeah, I was really sort of using a lot of my intuition as a human, not as a musician, as, trying to hold both the music and the intention of the words. So using humor, because there are a lot of really funny lines, gorgeous
Thank God.
lines. Thank God, I know, because
Thank
I was
God.
able to throw them in, and then there'd be this big moment of like grief, or people feeling trapped, or saying how angry, and they've got this internal rage that they've never shown. But how do they can't say that out loud, because how do they maintain that? How do they hold that and maintain their friendships? Like that's one of the things. But then to be able to throw something light in there, just for the audience to be able to just
Breathe.
get through it, breathe. Yeah, it was really interesting. So yeah, feeling it was really important to me, to feel that I had heard them.
And what a gift you have to be able to take the words and tangibly grab the emotion and convert that into a medium that is very tangible, that they can re-feel, or a new audience re-feel. So for me, it's the translation of the emotion that I find incredible in what you're saying. And I'll be honest, I've never thought about it before like that. But the way you're talking about how you've taken the words and you've interpreted them and you've then put them to music, what an extraordinary gift for those women and for the rest of us to hear. And I'm like, Erica, I so am going to hear. I'm going to go and listen to that composition, because I don't know too many mediums that do that, that are tangible representation of emotion. And we don't do emotion, right? So there's another layer of responsibility that you've got, because as a society, we push those away, which is
That's
why we're
right.
doing this as well. We want to bubble them up, we want to go there. So yeah, what
And
an
that's the
amazing gift.
interesting thing for me, to be here chatting to you, because I can see that that's what you're doing too. And I think that comes, that, I mean, I don't know where that's just the thing about being a composer. I suppose for me, that's the thing that I can do. I don't know where that comes from. That's just the thing that that's easy for me. That's the one thing in my life that's easy. But I think that comes out of me not knowing that I had my own voice, and needing to find a way to express myself that was not dangerous, that was not, that was palatable, I suppose, which isn't an awesome initial motivation, to say, what I've got here is precious, but I don't feel that it's palatable, so I have to put it into musical form in a way that feels okay. But I think it was sort of the way I've got an image of cordial in my mind, of we dilute the cordial. So I think the music is like the dilution of that essence. So I like to try and get to the core of what the concentrate is, and then make it heard.
So beautiful. This is why I just was so excited to talk to you. I'm curious then, Katy, if we I don't know that we're fast forwarding so much as just kind of zooming in on sort of your midlife then, in the context of all of this happening. You found the fact that you maybe have had this hidden voice, or this voice that's being expressed in more palatable ways. I know one of the things that you spoke about with me was this sense that you've had this sort of disruption that was partly circumstantial, partly driven by your own desire to make change. But what you've done is created a life that's very built for you. And I think that's very unusual, I'm going to say. And I think it's a very highly sensitive person thing to do too. So much of what you're saying, I'm like, oh, so much HSP stuff. But that is not this podcast. But I think that it's very unusual to say, you know what, this is who I am, and this is what I need, and this is what my life can look like in order to support who I am and how I want to feel and who I want to be in the world. So I think that would be a really powerful thing if you could share a little bit about what that's looked like, and maybe the stumbling blocks, maybe where that felt easy if it did, because I don't know that a lot of women know that that's an option, maybe, or I think it's a
Brave
bit brave
enough.
to do those things. Yeah.
I
Hugely
didn't know
brave.
it was an
Absolutely.
option. Yeah, I didn't know that it was an option. And I didn't know, I didn't know so much. So as this awareness came through, I mean, the marriage ending, I suppose, was significant only in that I didn't choose it. And so I knew that I kind of should have, but I didn't. And I was kind of grateful in a way that, that it did end, because I think had been better for both of us. And that disruption, I mean, that's a big disruption. It was a 24-year relationship with 3 children, and I was dependent in some ways on that relationship, and suddenly I had to find my own way. What I noticed, which I think is important, is that although I felt eroded at the end of that, like I felt, excuse me, like a bit of a shell of myself, I also could see that I had maintained my softness, which means that I had protected myself to some degree without knowing it. And I remember I had to write this piece straight after the separation, which was awful because, you've got to go to the core of you when you write, and you've got to go to that vulnerable place. And I was really vulnerable. So it was just awful to write. But one of the words, and these are not my words, but from a poet, Melbourne poet, Chris Wallace-Crabbe, who's one of Australia's treasures. And he wrote this line saying, "Approving mystery with all my heart." And I just grabbed onto that line and I said it for this choir piece that I was writing. And there was something in me that just grabbed hold of it and allowed it in my life. And I thought, yeah, I approve mystery. I want to approve mystery. This whole thing is expansive and scary, but I'm going to approve this mystery. And I can see now that openness, or that helped me realize that I'd kept my softness, I suppose. And I knew that softness was the core of me, and that was the bit that I'd protected with grit. And the grit was the thing that allowed me to see that I had options. And once I started seeing that I had options, then I kept seeing that I had more options. But it's one thing to see the options and it's one thing to take them. And so I developed a bit of a experimental attitude where I used to just say to myself, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but that's going to be good information. And then why don't I just do this as an experiment? So I starting dating again. Like I got married when I was really young. I didn't know what it was like to date in my 40s. I mean, and so what does it feel like to sit in front of somebody else? What does it feel like to have a conversation with someone and go out for dinner with a completely different human, or, different dates? And that's a whole story in itself. But this idea of experimentation really helped me, because I realized that I was very outcome oriented as a person. I used to, well, this is the thing, and this is how I'm going to get there. So it was about the outcome rather than about the pathway there. But when I said, well, why don't I just do this and see what happens, because that will give me information that I don't have, and then I can just take the next step. It was kind of freeing to not have to kind of plan everything out, but see that I had options. So I'm not really sure I'm getting to the heart of your question, though.
No, you are. I think you are. I think that idea of building your life to suit you, I think that comes from that place of going, oh, I have options, because we sort of were talking about the fact that women often don't feel or don't know that they even have that as as a choice, that it's a choice that they can make. Yeah. I mean, I can ask you another question, or you can keep going depending on what's lacking.
One of the things that I did do was find a mentor, and that then also led to me then becoming, I was already kind of a mentor anyway in the industry with artists, but then deliberately starting a business. But this, I had a few different mentors. It started off in the arts, but then I realized, no, I'm really interested in business. But then I really realized I'm interested in the personal development. And I've still got this particular mentor, and she is very big on personal responsibility and what she calls, and now I call, radical responsibility. So she would shine the torch on my dark places and say, well, here's something, what is this? And support me very beautifully. And she's also very highly sensitive human, but like firm, tough, and gentle. And I thought, oh, I could see myself in her. And I was like, oh, I think I can say hard things whilst saying them in a gentle way. And this idea of radical responsibility was really shocking to me, because I could see that I was making choices that were different to my values. And firstly, understanding my values was super important, because I realized that my values were not what I thought they were at all.
Yeah.
And I ended up with values of adventure and freedom, and I thought it'd be all, community and creativity. And I'm like, oh no, but these values I don't want these values, but they're mine. And so what if I radically take responsibility for them? And what if I radically align myself with my values and change my behavior, so that if that's not working for me, I don't just go along with the flow? What if I change? What if I take responsibility? And so I started going to the gym, and I've become quite strong and found that that's really something that my body loves. I've learned to, I started yin yoga, and I'm anti-yoga. And I know I'm talking to Erica here. But I found that on the mat in yin, that was the first time I got to listen to my body. I'd never heard it before, and I didn't realize that it was speaking. And now it speaks to me very loudly. I can hear it at least, and I incorporate it in. Well, I've really not been that kind of person ever before. So I know I'm talking generally, but the radical responsibility thing, I've got some very specific stories that we can get to, perhaps, that illuminate that sense of responsibility. So it was partly that I didn't know I had options, and it was partly that even when I did, I wasn't taking responsibility for really aligning myself with what I cared about.
Which is, I mean, it's easier to do that sometimes, isn't it? Taking radical responsibility
Oh,
is
yeah.
effortful. Yeah, like
I
it's
know.
hard
It takes
sometimes.
capacity, and no one has. I didn't have capacity. I had no capacity to do
Yeah.
that.
So how did you find it then? Because that's something that I'm very, very aware of currently in my own life and in the lives of the women around me, is that real sense
Mm.
of a lack of capacity, and simultaneously the need to take that radical responsibility to do the things that are going to give you the life that you want, and to feel the way that you want, and to navigate your midlife the way that you want. So how did you actually go about like finding the capacity? Because you clearly did. So what did that
I
look
did.
like?
I did. It was really very hard, but I started to, well. Oh, let me just gather my thoughts here. I started to understand, if I was looking at artists and high level artists, that there's a difference between high achieving artists and high performing artists. And the difference is that high achieving artists are doing all of the things, they have an incredible career on paper, but they don't have capacity, while high performing artists are doing all the same things. So it looks the same, but they have capacity. So what are they doing that is different? And one of those things is taking responsibility. And so, for example, I'm a person who, I just need so much alone time. And I've always identified as an extreme introvert, and people are like, you're not an introvert, you're, really bubbly and blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, no, I just need so much alone time. And that's how I came, I was researching introversion. That's how I came across highly sensitive. And then that's led to a whole lot of other insights. But if I need that much time to myself, I wasn't giving myself permission to have that time because it felt luxurious. It felt princess-like. I was not feeling like, I had enough time because I was a single parent of 3 boys, and there's a whole lot of activities that are associated with that, of course. And so I literally put everything on the table, including being a composer. And I thought, well, what is motherhood? Like, what is it to me? And I thought, well, there's all of these things, but really to me, it's about having that connection and being present for them. So I thought, well, what if I don't cook anymore? Because I don't like cooking. What if I just take cooking off the table? What if we just have eggs like 3 times a week and some veggies? And, what if I just make that easier? Is that, I know food's really important and that's a value to be well-being. So I wanted to put good food in them. But is the cooking, the cleaning, the blah, 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 blah. What if I pay for someone to clean my house? Oh, well, I can't do that. I'm a single parent, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you need that much time to yourself, are you saying that money is more important than that time to yourself? And I'm like, well, yeah, I am. So what if I put the money there? And so I started not just with money, but I started to claw back time to myself. And I've got to tell you, I already had a lot of time to myself. This was more time to myself. And I'm like, I shouldn't need that much time. So I was resisting. So when I stopped resisting and I let go of what I thought I should, and I know should's a big word on your podcast, and just did what I needed and take radical responsibility for that, even if it meant that I wasn't looking like what other mothers, or what I thought a good mum was, then all of that worrying and tension between, I've got to cook and blah, 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 and kids don't bother me, when actually my value is to be connected and to be there, be present for them. I could start to be present because I had more capacity, because I was giving myself this ridiculous amount of time to myself. So I started taking myself off every 8 weeks for a weekend away, where I would just allowed to do anything I wanted. I started saying Monday, no composition lessons, no clients. Just Monday can be whatever, dreaming day. And I would often be more productive. It can just be whatever I need it to be, because I often felt trapped into being timetabled. I ended up selling my house during COVID, even though I swore you would carry me out of that house in a coffin because I loved it so much. And I thought, no, this house is draining my capacity. What if I buy a really nice apartment instead? And what I found, and selling the house, I had to take very big responsibility for that negotiation process. But what that allowed me to do, because I found my voice in that process, was then once I'd sold the house and bought this off the plan apartment that I've literally just moved into 3 years later, I realised I could not work at the university part-time, and I could start the business that I've been trying to start as well. And I realised that choice of, because I was like, I can't sell my house. I'm like, well, what if you could? What if you did? And that has built a whole lot of capacity, because I'm in an apartment. I don't have this big mortgage. I don't have a big garden to look after. I have now resigned from my academic position, which I loved. So I had to let go, but I loved it. But I wasn't getting what I needed, which was time to myself. And so then I was prioritizing sleep. Well, what does it mean to have enough sleep? Well, it might mean not going out, and that might mean saying no to someone and disappointing them. And that was terrible. It's so hard to disappoint people, but I practiced disappointing people. So that was my radical responsibility. I'm prioritizing sleep, which means I have to disappoint people. And it's just, Is this
Yes, I
making
love this, Katie. I love it.
This is
and so the
brilliant.
grit and the softness towards myself, like being compassionate towards myself, to free myself, to have capacity. And I'm really only just starting to feel it. I mean, I've been building it for a number of years, but it's now I can see that I have capacity.
Yeah.
But I have capacity now for hard conversations. So I had to go against what I felt. So I didn't have capacity to have a hard conversation or to disappoint anyone. But I also was using my capacity by not aligning myself with the things that were important to me. So I had to choose. And so I chose me, which felt awful, and I was guilty and it was uncomfortable. And so I've accepted the uncomfortable, and I've accepted disappointing people, and I'm still alive. And
Who would
it
have
was
thunk it?
amazing. It was amazing to me because if anyone, I mean, no one was a bigger people pleaser or perfectionist than me. And I still can't believe that I'm sitting here telling you this story, that I feel like I've overcome that. I mean, yes, I could easily slip back into it, but if I'm compassionate towards myself and allowing that, and I think that goes back to the approving mystery thing. If I approve the mystery of what if I allow being uncomfortable and do the things that align with my values, then what happens? What's that experiment? And that's only resulted in positive things for me.
Being true to you, aligning with who you are, that whole discovery, self-discovery. And as you said earlier, radical self-discovery, because this is not something we talk about. This is not something we're taught to do. And you've done that through your own exploration and bravery. And kudos to you. That is brilliant. And this is what we want for women. You know, it is to be able to, and there's so much that's spinning through my mind, but in previous episodes, we've talked about creating space and the importance of that. Without the creating space, you don't give yourself the opportunity or the permission to see the fresh perspectives. And as you're talking about your story, I have this vision of a wide-angled lens, you know, where it's not the narrow focus anymore. You've got this brilliant horizon that is, you know, with the sun rising before you. And it's not to say the clouds don't come over, because they do, but you're happy to sit and watch the clouds come in and then watch them go again. You know,
Yeah,
I think
that's a
sitting
beautiful
with
way.
that emotion is so important. And Eric and I've talked about this before, haven't we, Erica, where we're brought up to be strong and we've got to push that away. But really the strength lies in sitting with it.
Do you know
Much.
my personal trainer, who's just this beautiful guy, and we've worked together now for 8 years, and this was, you know, when I started. And I remember 6 months in, and the marriage was ending, and I was still in that really difficult part in the gym where I'd never been to the gym before, and I was doing super hard things and I just hated it. But I knew that I wanted to be healthy in my old age, so this was what I was doing. And he said to me once, and I'll just never forget it, because I was telling him about this piece that I was writing, and I was getting all the surveys in, and I was saying, oh, this person said something about courage and vulnerability and things, and I was pushing this horrible machine down this fake grass, just dying and sad. I was so sad, as well. And he just said, your vulnerability is courage, Katy. As I pushed this thing, I'm weeping as I push this thing in this warehouse in the gym. And I laugh now, but he was there walking down that fake grass with me while I was weeping, saying, this is okay. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to be vulnerable, because that's courage. And I was just starting to learn that, and that really reinforced that. So having the right people around also made a difference. And so, I had a mentor. I had, at least in the exercise space, I had someone who was supportive in the exercise space, and friends. And that it's not something that you can do by yourself. And I'm by no way there. I'm not like such a work
Where
in
is there
progress.
though, right?
It's there.
Yeah.
It's
And as you,
Where is there?
yeah, where is there? That's a really good
yeah.
question, because as you said before, you were very outcomes focused. I know what I want to get to, what that thing is. But now it's the way to get there, or how the journey on the way is more valuable in so many ways.
And I often ask my 90-year-old self, what would, I remember thinking, I really shouldn't leave this university position, because who leaves a tenured position? They're so hard to get. And, it's quite prestigious in the industry and all of those things. But my pull was to leave. And I remember saying to my 90-year-old self, sort of metaphorically, should I leave? And she just swore at me, which I won't say here, but she's like, F yes. And I'm like, whoa, you swear, right? Okay,
We swear here.
90-year-old
It's
self
okay, Katy.
better. And I thought, oh yeah, I want to please her. Like I want her to have something to look back on and go, oh yeah, you did that brave thing, and you did that, and then look how that turned out. That was cool, and then we got to do this. And that's what I'm finding, is that the things that are according to my values tend to find me now, rather than me having to scramble after them. And that is also capacity building, because scrambling and people pleasing and being hyper aware and what's that? I've lost the word.
I know exactly what you're trying to say, but I can't think of the word either. Vigilant, hypervigilant.
Hypervigilant. I mean, I'm still hypervigilant, but I can catch myself now. I mean, that's exhausting. So when you put those down and you put the heavy rocks, because they're heavy rocks, even though we carry them around all the time, when you put them down, you suddenly have capacity that you didn't have. And yes, I've had to go through burnout and things, but I had to take responsibility for how I was contributing to that. Yeah, so now I get to talk to artists all the time about taking responsibility in the same ways. And it's not different to any other profession. It's just, they're not wanting to have hard conversations or to send that email in case someone doesn't email them back, or they're not accepted. And and so I realize that when I can support somebody else to do that, that has a ripple effect. But it's also because I've been supported in that very uncomfortable place.
Connection matters. Maybe that's a beautiful place to wrap up, is to remind everybody listening too how much, the reason we want to have these conversations is to start conversations, right? We want to start conversations. We want to continue conversations, because just as your project demonstrated, Katy, there's so much on the inside that we often don't allow out. And I know it's my personal mission to kind of make people, or help people, support people to feel more comfortable to be all of that, to know that it's safe in certain circumstances and with certain people to share that, because more of us, in the world, more of our humanity, more of our vulnerability, it really makes a difference. So thank you for your willingness to share with us today. We are just genuinely so, so grateful, Katy. Did you want to add anything, Anita, before we say goodbye?
Only where to be able to listen to this composition that's coming out. That's what I want to know. I want to listen to that, Katy, and we want to share that with everybody we know, because the world needs that. I know. And I'm not just saying that because you're here and now with us. I sense deep within me, my intuition and my inner knowing is saying this is a gift that the world needs to know about and to experience. So how do we share that gift with
thank
others?
you. It's been recorded by the ABC. It was on a podcast, and I think they've taken it down, but it was performed recently by the MSO, and the ABC recorded it. And I will try and get I'll hands on a link, or I'll see if the link's still live. But there is a recording out there that I'll I'll try and get for you so you could put it in the show notes or
That'd
whatever.
be
But I
awesome.
love
And
what you two are doing with your podcast. I think it's so important.
Thank you. And I was just going to say part 3 is going to be live soon?
Yes, this week,
Yeah.
part 2,
Oh, this
which
week.
is letters that Australian wrote to asylum seekers that were suppressed and not delivered to them, and I opened them and wrote another one. So that's part 2, and part 3 is stories of awe that I collected from the public, and that's going to be performed in a couple of weeks in Hamer Hall.
Okay, amazing. So probably has happened by the time this goes to air, but look Katy Abbott up. She is someone that you want to have on your radar just to, absorb her amazingness, because she's wonderful. So thank you again, Katy. This has been an absolute delight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for Midlife Unfiltered. If you loved this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. Be sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you don't miss a thing.
We'd also be delighted, and for sure do a little happy dance, if you took the time to leave us a rating and review. Those not only absolutely make our day, but more importantly, it helps other women who may be wanting something more from their midlife to know about us and to listen in as well. You can connect with us on socials too. You'll find links to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email in the show notes.